Indecent Exposure by Tom Sharpe. Read by Simon Callow.
Mr. Mayor, ladies and gentlemen, officers of the South African Police, Kommandant van Heerden shouted, we are gathered here today to pay tribute to the heroes of South African history, and in particular to honour the memory of the late Constable Els, whose recent tragic death has deprived Piemburg of one of its most outstanding policemen.
The Commandant's voice, amplified by the loudspeaker system, boomed across the parade ground, and lost in the process all trace of the hesitancy he felt in mentioning the name Els. It had been Lieutenant Verkramp's idea to award the stuffed Doberman as a trophy, and glad to see the thing moved from his office, the Commandant had agreed. Now faced with the prospect of eulogizing the dead Els, he wasn't so sure it had been a wise decision. In life, Els had shot more blacks dead in the course of duty than any other policeman in South Africa, and had been a constant offender against the immorality laws. The Commandant looked down at his notes and ploughed on.
A loyal comrade, a fine citizen, a devout Christian.
To the Mayor of Piemburg, looking down at the faces of the constables before him, it was clear that Constable Els's death had indeed been a great loss to the Piemburg constabulary. Certainly none of the faces he could see suggested those admirable characteristics which had evidently been so manifest in Constable Els. He was just coming to the conclusion that the average IQ must be in the region of 65, when the Commandant finished his speech and announced that the Els Memorial Trophy had been won by Constable van Heerden. The Mayor stood up and took the leash of the stuffed Doberman from Lieutenant Verkramp.
Congratulations on winning this award, he said, when the prize winner presented himself. And what did you do to be so highly honoured?
Constable van Heerden blushed and mumbled something about shooting a Kaffir.
He prevented a prisoner from escaping, the Commandant explained hurriedly. Very commendable, I'm sure, said the Mayor, and handed the leash to the constable. Splendid idea, giving a trophy like that,
the Mayor said as they sipped tea in the refreshment tent afterwards.
Though I must say, I would never have thought of a stuffed dog. Highly original. It was killed by the late Constable Els himself, the Commandant said. He must have been a remarkable man.
With his bare hands, said the Commandant.
Dear God,
said the Mayor. At the entrance of the tent, Lieutenant Verkramp was deep in conversation with a large blonde, whose turquoise dress fitted her astonishingly well. Under the pink picture hat, the Commandant recognized the features of Dr. von Bleimenstein, the eminent psychiatrist at Fort Rapier Mental Hospital. The Commandant idly speculated on the possibility that Verkramp was attracted to the blonde psychiatrist. It seemed unlikely somehow, but with Lieutenant Verkramp one never knew. The Commandant found a seat in the shade and looked out over the city. It was here that his heart belonged, he thought, idly scratching the long scar on his chest. Since the day of his transplant operation, Commandant van Heerden had felt himself in more ways than one a new man. His appetite had improved, he was seldom tired, and above all the erroneous belief that at least a portion of his anatomy could trace its ancestry back to the Norman conquest did much to alleviate the lack of esteem he felt for the rest of himself. Having acquired the heart of an English gentleman, all that remained for him to do was acquire those outward characteristics of Englishness he found so admirable. To this end he bought a Harris tweed suit, a Norfolk jacket, and a pair of brown brogues. To Lieutenant Verkramp, the change that had come over the Commandant since his operation suggested some sinister and secret knowledge. The advantage Verkramp had previously enjoyed by virtue of a better education and a quicker wit had quite disappeared. The Commandant treated him with a lordly tolerance that infuriated the Lieutenant, and greeted his sarcastic remarks with a benign smile. Worse still, Verkramp found the Commandant continually interfering with his attempts to stamp out communism, liberalism, and humanism, not to mention Anglicanism and Roman Catholicism and other enemies of the South African way of life in Piemburg. Now, as Verkramp and Dr. Bleimenstein stood in the refreshment tent, Lieutenant Verkramp mentioned the change that had come over the Commandant. I can't understand it, he said. He's taken to dressing up in fancy clothes. Dr. Bleimenstein looked at him sharply. What sort of fancy clothes? She asked. He's got a tweed jacket with pleated pockets and a sort of belt at the back. And he's taken to wearing strange shoes. Sounds fairly normal, Dr. Bleimenstein said. No question of perfume or an interest in women's underwear. Lieutenant Verkramp shook his head sadly. But his language has changed too. He insists on talking English. And he's got a picture of the Queen of England on his desk.
That does sound peculiar, said the doctor. Verkramp was encouraged. Doesn't seem natural for a good Afrikaner to go around saying absolutely spiffing what, does it? I'd have grave doubts about the sanity of a good Englishman who went round saying that, said the psychiatrist. Does he have sudden changes of mood? Yes, said Verkramp with feeling. Delusions of grandeur? Definitely, said Verkramp. Well, said Dr. von Bleimenstein, it does look as though your commandant is suffering from some kind of psychic disturbance. I should keep a close watch on him. By the time Dr. von Bleimenstein had left, Lieutenant Verkramp was in a state of mild euphoria. The notion that Kommandant van Heerden was on the verge of a breakdown opened promotion prospects. Lieutenant Verkramp had begun to think that shortly he would be chief of police in Piemburg. 2 days later, Lieutenant Verkramp was sitting in his office, dreaming of Dr. von Bleimenstein, when a directive arrived from the Bureau of State Security. It was marked, "For your eyes only," and had accordingly been read by several constables before it reached him. Verkramp read the directive through avidly. "You are hereby instructed to investigate cases of suspected liaison between South African police officers and Bantu women." Verkramp looked liaison up in the dictionary and found that it meant what he hoped. He read on, and as he read, vistas of opportunity opened before him. In the light of the propaganda value afforded to enemies of South Africa by press reports of court cases involving police officers and Bantu women, it is of national importance that ways and means be found to combat the tendency of white policemen to consort with black women. It is also in the interests of racial harmony that transracial sexual intercourse should be prevented. Where proof of such illegal sexual activity involving members of the South African police is forthcoming, no criminal proceeding should be instituted without prior notification of the Bureau of State Security. Lieutenant Verkramp picked up the telephone and dialed Fort Rapier Mental Hospital. He had something to ask Dr. von Bleimenstein. Later the same morning, the two met on what once had been the parade ground for the British garrison and which now served as an exercise area for the inmates of the hospital. "It's the ideal spot for what I have to say," Verkramp told the doctor as they strolled among the patients. "No one can possibly overhear us," a remark which gave rise, in the psychiatrist's bosom, to the hope that he was about to propose to her. His next remark was even more promising. "What I have to ask you concerns, sex." Dr. von Bleimenstein smiled coyly and looked down at her size 9 shoes. "Go on," she murmured, as the lieutenant's Adam's apple bobbed with embarrassment. "Of course, it's not a subject I would normally discuss with a woman," he muttered, finally. The doctor's hopes fell. "But since you're a psychiatrist, I thought you might be able to help." "Go on," she said, reverting to her professional tone of voice. "Out with it." Verkramp took the plunge. "It's like this. A lot of policemen have antisocial tendencies. They keep doing what they shouldn't do." "And what shouldn't policemen do?" There was no mistaking the note of disapproval in her voice. "Black women," Verkramp blurted out. "They shouldn't do black women, should they?" "Shouldn't?" she shouted furiously. Several patients scampered away towards the main block. "Shouldn't? You mean to say you brought me out here to tell me you've been screwing coon girls?" Lieutenant Verkramp knew that he had made a terrible mistake. The doctor's voice could be heard half a mile away. "Not me!" yelled Verkramp desperately. "I'm not talking about me!" Dr. von Bleimenstein stared at him doubtfully. "Not you?" she asked after a pause. "On my honor," Verkramp assured her. "What I meant was that other police officers do, and I thought you might have some ideas about how they can be stopped." "In my opinion," said the doctor, "any white man having sexual intercourse with a black woman should be castrated. I feel so strongly about miscegenation that I would be quite prepared to carry out the operation myself." Lieutenant Verkramp suddenly turned very white. The idea of being castrated by the beautiful doctor corresponded so closely with his own masochistic fantasies that he felt quite overcome. Dr. von Bleimenstein took him by the arm. "Why don't we continue our discussion at my cottage? It's cool down there, and we can have some tea." While Dr. von Bleimenstein made tea, Lieutenant Verkramp sat in the sitting-room and wondered if he had been wise to broach the subject of sex with a woman as forceful as Dr. von Bleimenstein. "Why don't you take off your jacket and make yourself comfortable?" the doctor asked when she returned with the tray. Verkramp shook his head nervously. "Oh, come now," said the doctor. "There's no need to be formal with me. I'm not going to eat you." Coming so shortly after news that the doctor was an advocate of castration, the idea of being eaten by her as well was too much for Verkramp. He sat down hurriedly in a chair. "I'm perfectly all right like this,"
he said, but Dr. von Bleimenstein wasn't convinced. "Stand up," said the doctor. Verkramp stood up. Dr. von Bleimenstein's fingers unbuttoned his jacket as he stood facing her, and a moment later she was pushing his jacket back over his shoulders so that he could hardly move his arms. As her cool fingers began to undo his tie, Verkramp found himself swept from the safe, remote world of sexual fantasy into an immediacy of satisfaction he had no means of controlling. With a volley of diminishing whimpers and an ecstatic release, Lieutenant Verkramp slumped against the doctor and was only prevented from falling by her strong arms. In the twilight of her hair, he heard her murmur, there, my darling." Lieutenant Verkramp passed out. 20 minutes later, he was sitting rigid with remorse and embarrassment. "You shouldn't have done that," he said. "Done what?" "You know," said Verkramp. "What did I do?" the doctor insisted. Lieutenant Verkramp shook his head miserably and said nothing. "How silly you are," the doctor went on. "There's nothing to be ashamed of. You get quite a few involuntary emissions every day in the hospital." Verkramp turned on her furiously. "That's with lunatics," he said, disgusted by her clinical detachment. "Sane people don't have them." He stopped abruptly, vaguely aware of the self-accusation. "Of course they do," said the doctor soothingly. "It's only natural between passionate men and women. Look at me. Do you find me attractive?" Verkramp nodded dumbly. "I'm glad," said the doctor, and taking the astonished lieutenant's head in her hands, she kissed him passionately on the mouth. "Now, about the problem you mentioned," she said, "I think I might be able to help you after all." "What problem?" Verkramp asked brusquely. He'd had enough help with his problems already. "About your men and the Kafir girls," said the doctor. "I've had a number of successful cures already. It's worked with alcoholics, transvestites, and homosexuals. I can't really see any reason why it shouldn't work just as well in the case of a perversion like miscegenation." There was no doubting Verkramp's interest now. "How would you go about it?" he asked eagerly. "Well, the first thing to do would be to isolate the personality factors in men with a tendency towards this sort of sexual deviation. That shouldn't be too difficult. I could work out a number of likely attributes. In fact, it might be a good thing if your men were to fill in a questionnaire." "What, about their sex life?" Verkramp asked. He could see the sort of reception a questionnaire like that would get at the Piemburg police station. "About sex and other things." "What other things?" Verkramp asked suspiciously. "Oh, the usual. Relations with mother, whether the mother was the dominant figure in the home, if they were fond of their black nanny, earliest sexual experience, normal things like that." "You mean to say you can tell just by answers to a questionnaire if a man wants to sleep with a Kafir?" Verkramp asked. Dr. von Bleimenstein shook her head. "Not exactly, but we'd have something to go on. After we had weeded out the likely suspects, I would interview them, in the strictest confidence, of course, and see if they were suitable for treatment." By the time Lieutenant Verkramp left the cottage that afternoon, he had in his pocket the draft questionnaire he was to put to the men in the Piemburg police station. He still had no idea what form the doctor's treatment would take. On the other hand, he had a far clearer picture of the sort of man who had transracial sexual tendencies. According to Dr. von Bleimenstein, the signs to look for were solitariness, sudden changes of mood, pronounced feelings of sexual guilt, an unstable family background, and, of course, an unsatisfactory sex life. As the lieutenant went through in his mind the officers and men in Piemburg, one figure emerged more clearly than all the others. Lieutenant Verkramp had begun to think he was about to discover the secret of the change that had come over Kommandant van Heerden. Within the hour he had issued his instructions. "I want him watched night and day," he told the security men assembled in his office. "I want a record of everything he does, where he goes, who he meets, and anything that suggests a break in his usual routine. Photograph everyone visiting his house. Put microphones in every room and tape all conversations. Tap his phone and record all his calls. Is that clear? I want the full treatment. I need, of course, hardly remind you that the utmost secrecy must be maintained throughout this operation. All right, you may go." When the security men had left, Lieutenant Verkramp gave orders for the questionnaire to be xeroxed and left on his desk ready for distribution the following morning. Next day, Mrs. Rousseau, whose job it was to superintend the black convicts who came from Piemburg prison every day to do the commandant's housework, had her work cut out answering the front doorbell to admit a succession of municipal officials who seemed to think there was a damaged gas pipe under the kitchen, a main short circuit in the living room, and a leak in the water tank in the attic. Since the house wasn't connected to the gas, and the electric stove in the kitchen functioned perfectly, while there were no signs of damp on the bedroom ceiling, Mrs. Russo did her best to deter the officials, who seemed determined to carry out their duties with a degree of conscientiousness and a lack of specialized knowledge she found quite astonishing. "Shouldn't you switch off the main supply first?" she asked the man from the electricity board, who was laying wires in the commandant's bedroom. "Suppose so," the man said, and went downstairs. When, 10 minutes later, she found the light still on in the kitchen, Mrs. Russo took matters into her own hands and went into the cupboard under the stairs and switched the mains off herself. By the time he was back in the darkness of the attic, the electricity man had assured Mrs. Russo that there was no need to cut the mains off. "Oh, you know your own job, I suppose," Mrs. Russo told him, rather doubtfully. Mrs. Russo went back under the stairs and turned the supply on again. The scream that issued from the attic, where the waterboard man had his fingers in the socket of the lamp, was followed by an appalling rending noise from the bedroom and the sound of falling plaster. "Whatever will the Commandant say when he finds what a mess you've made?" she asked the leg that hung through the hole in the ceiling. An answering groan came from the attic. "Are you all right?" Mrs. Russo asked, anxiously. The leg twitched violently and was still. "You just hang on, and I'll give you a shove from below," the electricity man said, and climbed onto the bed. Mrs. Russo had just reached the landing when there was another terrible yell from the bedroom. She hurried in and found the electricity man lying prostrate amidst the plaster on the commandant's bed. "What's the matter now?" she asked. The man wiped his face and looked up at the leg reproachfully. "It's alive," he said finally. "That's what you think," said a voice from the attic. "I'm sure I don't know what to think," Mrs. Russo said. "Well, I do," the electricity man told her, sitting up on the bed. "I think you ought to go and cut the main supply off. I'm not touching that leg till you do." In the end, with the help of the black convicts, they managed to get the unconscious waterboard official down from the attic, and Mrs. Russo was persuaded to give him the kiss of life on the couch in the commandant's sitting room. "You can get those Kaffirs out of here before I do," she told the electricity man. "I'm not doing any kissing with them looking on. It might give them ideas." The electricity man shooed the convicts out, and presently the waterboard official recovered enough to be taken back to the police station. "Bungling idiots!" Verkramp snarled when they reported back to him. "I said bug the house, not knock it to bits." When Kommandant van Heerden arrived home that evening, it was to find his house in considerable disorder and with most of the services cut off. "What the hell's wrong with everything?" he wondered as he was rummaging about under the stairs trying to find a fuse box with the help of a box of matches. He'd taken all the fuses out and put them back again before he realized that the main switch was off. With a sigh of relief, he pulled it down to on. Then there was a loud bang in the fuse box, and the light in the hall, which had come on momentarily, went out again. With the help of a torch, he made his way upstairs and was appalled by the mess in his bedroom. There was a large hole in the ceiling, and the bed was covered with plaster. The Commandant sat down on the edge of the bed and shone his torch through the hole in his ceiling. Finally, he turned to the phone on his bedside table and dialed the police station. He was sitting there, staring out of the window, when he became aware that what looked like a shadow under the jacaranda tree across the road was smoking a cigarette. The Commandant put the phone down and crossed to the window to take a better look. Staring into the darkness, he was startled to notice another shadow under another tree. He went through to the bathroom, which overlooked his back garden, and opened the window. The Commandant peered out, and had just decided that his back garden was free of interlopers when an azalea bush lit a cigarette. In a state of considerable alarm, the Commandant scurried back to his bedroom and dialed the police station. "I'm being watched," he told the duty sergeant, when the man finally picked up the phone. "Oh, really?" said the sergeant, who was used to nutters ringing him up in the middle of the night with stories of being spied on. "And who is watching you?" "I don't know," whispered the Commandant. "There are 2 men out front and another in my back garden. I've got a dirty great hole in the ceiling above my bed, and my house has been burgled," he went on, and was rewarded for his pains by hearing the sergeant inform somebody else at the police station that he had another nutcase on the line. "Now then, correct me if I'm wrong," said the sergeant, before the Commandant could reprimand him for insubordination, "but you say that there are 3 men watching your house, that there's a dirty great hole in your ceiling, and that your house has been burgled. Is that right? You haven't left anything out?" In his bedroom, Kommandant van Heerden was on the verge of apoplexy. "Just one thing," he yelled into the phone. "This is your commanding officer, Kommandant van Heerden, speaking, and I'm ordering you to send a patrol car round to my house at once." 5 minutes later, patrol cars from all over Piemburg were converging on Kommandant van Heerden's house. and the duty sergeant was wondering what he was going to say to the commandant in the morning. Lieutenant Verkramp was wondering much the same thing. News of the fiasco at the commandant's house reached him via Sergeant Breitenbach, who had spent the evening tapping the commandant's telephone and who had had the presence of mind to order the watching agents to leave the area before the patrol cars arrived. Unfortunately, the microphones scattered about the commandant's house remained. Lieutenant Verkramp could imagine that their presence there would hardly improve his relations with his commanding officer if they were discovered. Kommandant van Heerden arrived at the police station, determined to make someone pay for the damage to his property. He wasn't quite sure which of the public utilities to blame, and Mrs. Rousseau's explanation hadn't made the matter any clearer. Once in his office, he spent an hour on the phone haranguing the managers of the gas, electricity, and water boards in an attempt to get to the bottom of the affair. It took the efforts of all three managers to convince him that their men had never been authorized to enter his house, that there was absolutely nothing the matter with his electricity or his water supply, and that there hadn't been a suspected gas leak within a mile of his house, and finally, that they couldn't be held responsible for the damage done to his property. The Commandant reserved his opinion on this last point and said he would consult his lawyer. The manager of the water board told him that it wasn't the business of the board to mend leaks in cisterns in any case, and the Commandant said it wasn't anybody's business to make large holes in the ceiling of his bedroom, and he certainly wasn't going to pay for the privilege of having them made. Having raised his blood pressure to a dangerously high level in this exchange of courtesies, the Commandant sent for Lieutenant Verkramp. "What's the matter with you, Verkramp? You look as though you'd spent the night on the tiles." "Just an attic of colic," spluttered Verkramp, unnerved by the Commandant's percipience. "Of what?" "An attack of colic," said Verkramp, trying to control his speech. "Just a slip of the foot. Tongue." "For God's sake, pull yourself together, Lieutenant," the Commandant told him. "It's about this business at your home, sir," said Verkramp. "I have some information which may be of interest to you." Kommandant van Heerden sighed. He might have guessed that Verkramp might have his grubby fingers in this particular pie. "Well?" Lieutenant Verkramp swallowed nervously. "We in the security branch," he began, spreading the responsibility as far as possible, "have recently received information that an attempt was going to be made to bug your house." He paused to see how the Commandant would take the news. Kommandant van Heerden responded predictably. He sat up in his chair and stared at Verkramp in horror. "Good God," he said. "You mean—" "Precisely, sir," said Verkramp. "Acting on this information, I put your house under 24-hour surveillance." "You mean—" "Exactly, sir," Verkramp continued. "You have probably noticed that your house has been watched." "That's right," said the Commandant. "I saw them there last night." Verkramp nodded. "My men, sir." "Across the road and in my back garden," said the Commandant. "Exactly, sir," Verkramp agreed. "We thought they might return." The Commandant was losing track of the conversation. "Who might return?" "The communist saboteurs, sir." "Communist saboteurs? What the hell would communist saboteurs want to do in my house?" "Bug it, sir," said Verkramp. "After the failure of their attempt yesterday, I thought they might return." Kommandant van Heerden took a firm grip on himself. "Are you trying to tell me that all those gas men and water board officials were really communist saboteurs?" "In disguise, sir. Fortunately, thanks to the efforts of my counter-agents, the attempt was foiled. One of the communists fell through the ceiling." Kommandant van Heerden leant back in his chair, satisfied. He had found the person responsible for the hole in his bedroom ceiling. "So that was your fault," he said. "Exactly," Verkramp agreed. "And we'll see that repairs are carried out immediately." The news had taken a great burden off the Commandant's mind. On the other hand, he was still puzzled. "What I don't understand is why these communists should want to bug my house in the first place. Who are they, anyway?" he asked. "I'm afraid I can't disclose any identities yet," Verkramp said, and fell back on the Bureau of State Security. "Orders from boss." "Well, what the hell is the point of bugging my house?" asked the Commandant, who knew better than to question orders from boss. I never say anything important there." Verkramp agreed. "But they weren't to know that, sir," he said. "In any case, our information suggested they were hoping to acquire material which would allow them to blackmail you." He watched Kommandant van Heerden very closely to see how he would react. The Commandant was appalled. "God Almighty!" he gasped, and mopped his forehead with a handkerchief. Verkramp followed up his advantage swiftly. "If they could get something on you, something sexual, anything a bit kinky." He hesitated. The Commandant was sweating profusely. "They'd have you by the short hairs, wouldn't they?" Privately, Kommandant van Heerden had to agree that they would, but he wasn't admitting as much to Lieutenant Verkramp. He raced through the catalogue of his nightly habits and came to the conclusion that there were several he would rather the world knew nothing about.
"The diabolical swine,"
he muttered, and looked at Verkramp with something approaching respect. The lieutenant wasn't such a fool after all.
"What are you going to do about it?" he asked.
"Two things," said Verkramp. "The first is to allay the suspicions of the communists as far as possible by ignoring this affair at your house. Let them think we don't know what they're up to. Lay the blame on the water board."
"I've done that already," said the Commandant.
"Good. What we have to realize is that this incident is part of a nationwide conspiracy to undermine the morale of the South African police. It is vital that we should do nothing premature."
"You mean to tell me," the Commandant said,
"that they are deliberately trying to obtain facts that can be used to blackmail police officers all over the country?" "Precisely, sir," said Verkramp. "I have reason to believe that they are particularly interested in sexual indiscretions committed by police officers." The Commandant tried to think of any sexual indiscretions he might have committed lately, and rather regretfully couldn't. On the other hand, he could think of thousands committed by the men under his command.
"What are you going to do to stop this infernal campaign?" the Commandant asked.
Lieutenant Verkramp handed him the questionnaire. "With your approval, sir," he said, "I'd like to have these questionnaires distributed to all the men on the station. From the answers we get, it should be possible to spot any likely victims of blackmail." Kommandant van Heerden looked at the questionnaire, which was headed innocuously enough, Personality Research, and marked Strictly Confidential. Before he could get any further, Verkramp was explaining that he had orders from Pretoria to carry out the investigation.
"Boss,"
said the Commandant.
"Boss,"
said Verkramp.
"In that case, go ahead," said the Commandant.
"I'll leave you to fill that one in," said Verkramp, and left the office delighted at the turn of events. He gave orders to Sergeant Breitenbach to distribute the questionnaires, and telephoned Dr. von Bleimenstein to let her know that everything was proceeding, if not according to plan, since he hadn't one, at least according to opportunity. If Verkramp was satisfied with the way things were going, Kommandant van Heerden, seated at his desk with the questionnaire in front of him, wasn't. Lieutenant's story was convincing enough. The Commandant had no doubt the communist agitators were at work in Zululand. Nothing less could explain the truculence of the Zulus in the township at the recent increase in bus fares. The duty sergeant's report that the investigating team had discovered a microphone under his sink only went to prove how accurate Lieutenant Verkramp's forecast had been. Ordering the sergeant to leave the investigation to the security branch, the Commandant sent a note to Verkramp which read,
"Re our discussion this morning. The presence of microphone in kitchen confirms your report. Suggest you take counteraction immediately. Van Heerden."
With renewed confidence in the ability of his second-in-command, the Commandant decided to tackle the questionnaire Verkramp had given him. He filled in the first few questions happily enough, and it was only when he had turned the page that there dawned on him the feeling that he was being led gently into a quagmire of sexual confession, where every answer only dragged him deeper down. "Did you have a black nanny?" seemed innocuous enough. The Commandant put yes, only to find that the next question was size of breasts, large, medium, small. After a moment's hesitation, not unmixed with alarm, he ticked large, and went on to consider nipple length, long, medium, short.
"It's a bloody funny way to fight communism,"
he thought, trying to remember the length of his nanny's teats. In the end he put long, and found himself faced with, did black nanny tickle private parts? Often, sometimes, infrequently. The Commandant looked desperately for never, and couldn't find it. In the end he ticked infrequently, and turned to the next question. Age at first ejaculation. 3 years? 4 years?
"Don't leave much to chance,"
thought the Commandant, indignantly trying to make up his mind between 6 years, which was quite untrue, but which seemed less likely to undermine his authority, than 16 years, which was more accurate. He picked up the phone and called Verkramp's office. Sergeant Breitenbach answered the phone.
"Where's Verkramp?"
the Commandant demanded. The sergeant said he was out, and could he help?
"Well, you can tell Lieutenant Verkramp that I have no intention of answering question 25. "Oh, which one is that?" "Is the one that goes, 'How many times do you masturbate every day?'" said the Commandant. "You can tell Verkramp that I think it's an invasion of privacy to ask questions like that." "Yes, sir,"
said Sergeant Breitenbach, studying the possible answers on the questionnaire, which ranged from 5 times to 25 times. Commandant slammed down the phone, and, locking the questionnaire in his desk, went out to lunch in a filthy temper.
"Dirty bitch, wanting to know things like that,"
he thought as he stomped downstairs, and he was still grumbling to himself when he finished lunch in the police canteen.
"I'll be up at the golf club if anyone wants me," he
told the duty sergeant, and left the police station. Van Heerden ordered a double brandy from the barman and took his drink out to a table on the terrace where he could sit and watch more experienced players drive off. He was sitting there, absorbing the English atmosphere and trying to rid himself of the nagging conviction that the even tenor of his life was being undermined in some mysterious way, when a crunch of gravel in the clubhouse forecourt made him glance over his shoulder. A vintage Rolls-Royce had just parked, and the occupants were climbing out. The Commandant finished his drink and strolled over to inspect the vintage Rolls-Royce. Peering through the window, Commandant van Heerden gazed at a book on the back seat, and as he gazed, knew with a certainty that passed all understanding that he was on the brink of a new phase of discovery in his search for the heart of an English gentleman. There before him, on the back seat of the Rolls, was portrayed with an exactitude he would never have believed possible the face of the man he wanted to be. The book was As Other Men Are, by Dawnford Yeats. The Commandant made his way to the public library in the certain knowledge that he was about to learn from the works of Dawnford Yeats the secret of that enigma which had puzzled him for so long, how to be an English gentleman. By the time Lieutenant Verkramp left the police station that evening and returned to his flat to change, he was a supremely happy man. Like the Commandant, Lieutenant Verkramp felt himself on the brink of a discovery that would change his whole life and transform him from merely second-in-command into a position of authority more suited to his ability. As he waited for his bathwater to run, Lieutenant Verkramp adjusted the receiver in his bedroom and checked the tape recorder connected to it. Before long, he could make out the Commandant shuffling about his house and opening and shutting cupboards. Satisfied that his listening device was functioning properly, Verkramp switched it off and went and had his bath. He had just finished and was climbing out when the front doorbell rang. "Damn," said Verkramp, grabbing a towel and wondering who the hell was visiting him at this inconvenient moment. He went out into the hall, trailing drops of bathwater as he went, opened the door irritably, and was amazed to see Dr. von Bleimenstein standing on the landing. "Come in quick," he squawked. Verkramp hurriedly shut the door and scurried past her into the safety of his bathroom. By the time he emerged, dressed, Lieutenant Verkramp was quite unprepared for the sight that met his eyes. Dr. von Bleimenstein had taken off her musk-wash coat and was lying provocatively on his sofa in a bright red dress which clung to her body with an intimacy of contour which astonished Verkramp and made him wonder how she had ever got into it. Dr. von Bleimenstein started telling him about aversion therapy. "It's quite straightforward," she said. "The patient is tied to a bed while slides of his particular perversion are projected on a screen. At the very moment you show him the picture, you also administer an electric shock." Verkramp was fascinated. "And that cures him?" he asked. "In the end, the patient shows signs of anxiety every time a slide is shown," said the doctor. Dr. von Bleimenstein explained that a modified form of aversion therapy was what she had in mind for treating cases of miscegenation among policemen in Piemburg. Verkramp tried to think what she meant. "I don't quite see," he began. "Nude black women," said the doctor. "Project slides of nude black women on the screen and administer an electric shock at the same time." Verkramp looked at her with open admiration. "Brilliant," he said. "Marvelous. You're a genius." Dr. Bleimenstein simpered. "It's not my original idea," she said modestly, "but I suppose you could say that I have adapted it to South African needs." "A toast," said Verkramp, raising his glass. I drink to your success." Dr. von Bleimenstein raised her glass. "To our success, darling. To our success." They drank, and as they drank, it seemed to Verkramp that for the first time in his life he was really happy. No longer would the danger of South Africa becoming a country of coloureds haunt the minds of South Africa's leaders. He leant towards her entrancing breasts and took her hand. "I love you," he said simply. "I love you too," murmured the doctor, gazing back at him with an intensity almost predatory. "I want you," whispered the doctor, emphasizing her need by digging her crimson fingernails into the palm of Verkramp's hand. "I want you desperately." "You don't understand," he said. But as her lips silenced his weak protest, Lieutenant Verkramp lost all sense of guilt. He was helpless in her arms, and there was nothing he could do. End of Side 1. Side 2. Kommandant van Heerden, arriving at his office next morning, freshly imbued with the determination to behave like a gentleman, felt much the same. Dr. von Bleimenstein's questionnaire had aroused a storm of protest in the Piemburg police station.
"It's part of a campaign to stop the spread of communism,"
the Commandant explained to Sergeant de Kock, who had been deputed to express the men's sense of grievance.
"What's the size of the coffer's teats got to do with the spread of communism?" the sergeant wanted to know. "You'd better ask Lieutenant Verkramp about it," he said. "It's his affair, not mine. As far as I'm concerned, no one need answer the beastly thing. I certainly don't intend to." "Yes, sir. Thank you, sir,"
said the sergeant, and went off to cancel Verkramp's orders. In the afternoon, the Commandant returned to the golf club. As he approached the stoop, he was delighted to see the vintage Rolls steal noiselessly down the drive from the main road and park overlooking the course. Mrs. Heathcote Kilcoon was driving.
"Excuse me,"
she called to the Commandant, leaning on the radiator with a gesture of elegance the Commandant had seen only in the more expensive women's magazines,
"but I wonder if you could help me."
Kommandant van Heerden's pulse rate went up abruptly. He said he would be honoured to help her.
"I'm such a fool," continued Mrs. Heathcote Kilcoon, "and I know absolutely nothing about cars. I wonder if you could just have a look at it and tell me if anything's wrong."
With the gallantry that belied his utter ignorance of motor cars in general and vintage Rolls-Royces in particular, the Commandant fumbled with the catch of the bonnet and was presently greasily engaged in looking for anything that might indicate why the car had so fortuitously ceased to function at the top of the golf club drive. Presently, when he had inspected the fan belt and the dipstick, which more or less exhausted his automotive know-how, he gave up the unequal task.
"I'm so sorry," he said, "but I can't see anything obviously wrong."
"Perhaps I'm just out of petrol," smiled Mrs. Heathcote Kilcoon. Kommandant van Heerden looked at the petrol gauge and found it registered empty. Mrs. Heathcote Kilcoon breathed her apologies.
"And you've been to so much trouble, too," she murmured.
But Kommandant van Heerden was too happy to feel that he had been to any trouble at all.
"It was too sweet of you to help,"
Mrs. Heathcote Kilcoon said, and held out her gloved hand. Commandant took it, and with a sudden impulse that sprang from page 49 of As Other Men Are, pressed it to his lips.
"Your servant,"
he murmured. Later that day, Mrs. Heathcote Kilcoon thought about the Commandant. "There's something so rural about him," she murmured to herself. In the following days, Kommandant van Heerden, oblivious of the interest that was being focused on him by Lieutenant Verkramp, continued his literary pilgrimage with increased fervour. Every morning, closely shadowed by the security men detailed by Verkramp to watch him, he would visit the Piemburg library for a fresh volume of Dawnford Yeats, and every evening return to his bugged home to devote himself to its study. While Verkramp tried to forget Dr. von Bleimenstein by immersing himself in the study of abnormal psychology, the doctor, unaware of the fatal impact her sexuality had had on Verkramp's regard for her, tried desperately to remember the full details of their night together. Since then she had telephoned Verkramp several times, only to find that his line seemed to be permanently engaged. In the end she gave up, decided that it was unladylike to pursue him. "He'll come back to me in due course," she said smugly. "He won't be able to keep away." Mrs. Heathcote Kilcoon was too much of a lady to have any doubts about the propriety of pursuing her acquaintance with Kommandant van Heerden. Every afternoon the vintage Rolls would steal down the drive of the golf course, and Mrs. Heathcote Kilcoon would play a round of very good golf until the Commandant arrived. Then she would save him the embarrassment of displaying his ineptness with the golf club by engaging him in conversation. "Being the Commandant of Police in a town the size of Piemburg must be an awesome responsibility," she said. "There must be nights when you simply can't get to sleep for worry." "When I go to bed," he said, "I go to sleep." Mrs. Heathcote Kilcoon looked at him with admiration.
"How I envy you," she said. "I suffer terribly from insomnia." "You should try reading in bed," he suggested. "Some people find that helps."
"But what?" Mrs. Heathcote Kilcoon asked, in a tone which suggested she had read everything there was to be read.
"Dawnford Yeats," said the Commandant promptly,
and was delighted to find Mrs. Heathcote Kilcoon staring at him in astonishment. It was precisely the effect he had hoped for. "You too," she gasped. "Are you a fan?" The Commandant nodded. "Isn't he marvellous?" Mrs. Heathcote Kilcoon said breathlessly. "My husband and I are devoted to him, absolutely devoted. How extraordinary that you should find him so wonderful. I mean, I don't want to... Well, I always thought he appealed only to the English, and to find a true Afrikaner who likes him..." She trailed off, evidently afraid of offending him. Kommandant van Heerden assured her that Dawnford Yates was the sort of Englishman Afrikaners most admired. By the time they parted, Mrs. Heathcote Kilcoon had said that the Commandant must meet her husband. The Commandant had said he would be honoured to. "You've done what?" Colonel Heathcote Kilcoon asked apoplectically when she told him he had invited the Commandant to stay. "White ladies? A bloody boor! I won't hear of it! By God, you'll be asking Indians
Or niggers next.
I don't care what you say, I'm not having the swine in my house." "But," said Major Bloxham. "But me no buts," shouted the Colonel. "The man's a scoundrel, got coloured blood, too. All Afrikaners have a touch of the tar. A known fact, not having a nigger in my house." Major Bloxham turned back towards the house. "Cub hunting season," said the Colonel. "Looking forward to that." "Fox in good form?" asked the Major. "Harbinger's been keeping him in trim," said the Colonel. "Been taking him for a 10-mile trot every morning. Good man, Harbinger, knows his job." "Harbinger's a convict," Mrs. Heathcote Kilcoon said presently. "You got him from the prison at Wazen." "Poacher turned gamekeeper," said the Colonel, who disliked his wife's new habit of intruding a sense of reality into his world of reassuring artifice. "Make the best sort, you know. Good with dogs, too." "Hounds," said Mrs. Heathcote Kilcoon reprovingly. "Hounds, dear, never dogs." Opposite her, the Colonel turned a deep shade of puce. "After all," continued Mrs. Heathcote Kilcoon, before the Colonel could think of a suitable reply, "if we're going to pretend we're county, and that we've ridden to hounds for countless generations, we might as well do it properly." Colonel Heathcote Kilcoon regarded his wife venomously. "You forget yourself, my dear," he said at last. "How right you are," Mrs. Heathcote Kilcoon answered. "I have forgotten myself. I think we all have." She rose from the table and left the room. At Piemburg police station, Kommandant van Heerden was busy making arrangements for his holiday. He had bought a map of the Wazen district, a trout rod and flies, a pair of stout walking boots, a deer-stalker hat, a 12-bore shotgun, some waders, and a pocket-book called Etiquette for every man. Thus accoutred, he felt confident that his stay with the Heathcote Kilcoons would give him valuable experience in the art of behaving like an English gentleman. Having acquired the outward vestiges of Englishness, the Commandant had practised saying frightfully and absolutely in what he hoped was an authentic accent. When it was dark, he went into his garden with the trout rod and practised casting flies into a bucket of water on the lawn without ever managing to land a fly in the bucket, but decapitating several dozen dahlias in the attempt. "Practising what?" Lieutenant Verkramp asked incredulously when his men reported this new activity to him. "Fishing from a bucket," the security men told him. "He's off his rocker," Verkramp said. "What's all this about him meeting some woman at the golf club?" he asked. He'd never given up his original idea that the Commandant was engaged in some sort of illicit love affair. "Chats her up every day," the security men told him. "Plump little thing, with dyed hair, aged about 55. Drives an old Rolls." Verkramp gave orders to his men to find out all they could about Mrs. Heathcote Kilcoon, and went back to his study of fact and fiction in psychology. He had no sooner started than his phone rang with a message that the Commandant wanted to see him. Verkramp put the book away and went along the passage to the Commandant's office. "Ah, Verkramp," said the Commandant. "I'm taking a fortnight's leave as from Friday, and I'm leaving you in charge here." Lieutenant Verkramp was delighted. A fortnight, he thought. A fortnight in which to show what I can really do. It wasn't long, but Lieutenant Verkramp had no intention of wasting time. There were two things he had particularly in mind. With the Commandant out of the way, he would put into effect Plan Red Route. During the course of the morning, Verkramp made a number of phone calls, and in various firms throughout the city, employees who didn't normally receive phone calls during working hours were called to the phone. In each case, the procedure was the same. "The Mamba is striking," said Verkramp. "The Cobra has struck," said the secret agent. That afternoon, Lieutenant Verkramp, disguised as a motor mechanic and driving a breakdown truck, left town for the first of his appointments, and half an hour later, 10 miles out on the Flockfontaine Road, was bending over the engine of Agent 745396's car, pretending to mend a broken distributor to lend verisimilitude to his disguise, while giving 745396 his instructions. "Get yourself fired," Verkramp told the agent. "Done that already," said 745396, who had taken the afternoon off without permission. "Good," said Verkramp, wondering how the hell he was going to get the distributor together again. "I want you to work full-time from now on." "Doing what?" "Infiltrating the revolutionary movement in Zululand." "Where do I start?" 745-396 asked. Start hanging about Florian's Cafe and the Colonial Bar. Plenty of students and commies go there. The university canteen is another place where subversives gather, Verkramp explained. I know all that, said 745-396. The last time I went there, I got chucked out of my ear. The last time you went there, you hadn't blown anything up, said Verkramp. This time you won't just say you're a saboteur, you'll be able to prove it. Oh. Verkramp led the way round to the cab of his breakdown truck and handed the agent a packet. Gelignite and fuses, he explained. On Saturday night, blow the transformer on the Durban Road. Put it there at 11 and get back into town before it goes up. It's got a 15-minute fuse. All right, so I'll blow the transformer. What then? Mingle with the students and the lefties, and let it be known you're a saboteur. You'll soon find the swine letting you in on their plans. 745-396 was doubtful. How do I prove I blew the transformer? He asked. Verkramp considered the problem. Got a point there, he agreed. I suppose if you could show them some gelignite, it would do the trick. Fine, said 745-396, sarcastically. And where do I get jelly from? I don't keep the stuff handy, you know. The police armory, said Verkramp. I'll have a key cut, and you can take some out when you need it. What do I do when I've found the real saboteurs? 745-396 asked. Get them to blow something up and inform me before they do, so that we can nab the bastards, said Verkramp. It's important that we have proof of sabotage, so that we can hang the swine. I don't want any conspiracy trials this time. I want proof of terrorism. He drove off to his next rendezvous, and during the course of the next 2 days, 12 secret agents had left their jobs and had been given targets round Piemburg to destroy. 12 keys for the police armory had been cut. Verkramp felt confident that he was about to strike a blow for freedom and Western civilization in Piemburg, which would significantly advance his career. Having initiated Operation Red Rout, Lieutenant Verkramp considered his second campaign, that against miscegenating policemen, which he had codenamed Whitewash. He had decided to try apomorphine injections as well as electric shock aversion therapy, and sent Sergeant Breitenbach to the police surgeon to get a prescription for 2 gallons of apomorphine. The sergeant went down to the police morgue, where the surgeon was performing an autopsy on an African who had been beaten to death during questioning. Natural causes, he wrote on the death certificate, before attending to Sergeant Breitenbach. There's a limit to what I'm prepared to do, said the surgeon, the sudden display of professional ethics. I've got my Hippocratic oath to consider, and I'm not issuing prescriptions for 2 gallons. 1,000 cc's is the most I'll do, and if Verkramp wants anything more out of his prisoners, he'll have to tickle their throats with a feather. Is that enough? A 3 cc dose should get you 330 pukes, said the surgeon. Don't overdo it, though. I've got my work cut out signing death certificates as it is.
End part 1.